Hey, and welcome back to Social Audio Think Tank. Josh here. Just a quick message before we get into this episode. Jackson and I actually did something a little bit silly, and I think that it points to a good tip for all you podcasters out there. In the upcoming episode, the double endisode, we actually made reference to this weird timeline thing where we were planning to release another episode after the one that you're about to hear, that we actually ended up releasing earlier. You'll see that the Zoom-isode, it was called. And essentially, my bonus tip before we even kick in today is if you have anything in an episode that relates to the release schedule of another episode, and it might sound a little bit skewy, or you're planning on doing something a bit strange, or you make a joke that's related to that timeline, maybe either put a correction in your upcoming episode or future episode, or edit that whole section out of. The other thing I'd suggest is maybe just make a quick note for yourself that you did mention your own release schedule and maybe try and stick to that or edit all those parts out. Okay, we'll jump in now with the double endisode. Thanks.
Hello and welcome to Social Audio Think Tank. My name is Jackson and I'm here recording with Josh. How are you, Josh?
I am very well, thank you, Jackson. And it sounds like you're running a slightly different rig over Skype for this call.
Yes, well, let's get into the tech because so I'm recording, well, we're talking over Skype and I'm recording with I've got an SM58 running into my new Zoom H6, which we're going to get into in a future episode. And that's running through to you. And what are you running at your end, Josh?
I'm going almost as simple a rig as I normally go on Skype. I usually use an MXL USB 009, but that was nicely packed away after my trip to Melbourne the other day, and I'm kind of on the road at the moment, so I'm using an AT2005, which is an Audio-Technica microphone, and that's running straight into my old PC laptop. So slightly different rig, and I'm just, recording in Audacity. So I'm running that as a double ender. So basically, so we get all the tech and all the tips out of the way early. Basically, Jackson and I are recording a pretty simple setup. And the end result will actually be pieced together by an Audacity file recorded in WAV at my end of just my voice, and Jackson is doing the same at his end in Audacity. So for anyone out there that's wondering how can you get really, really good sound quality without actually needing to record someone's information coming from another end, if you got bad bandwidth or anything, at the moment it wouldn't really matter as long as Jackson and I could hear each other a little bit, whether we actually had a good connection or not, because we're recording natively at our own end. So that is kind of a simple way, I guess, of describing a double ender for anyone out there that's got multiple co-hosts. If everyone could just press record on Audacity and they can find the sound source, just their own microphone, then you just email it all into whoever's doing the post-production. So that's what Jackson and I will be doing for today.
I also might give my own little tech tip on doing a double ender, which is I find it's really effective for editing, because if there's ever a point where two people talk over each other and one of them stops for some reason, you can basically just cut their entire bit out and it's as if it never happened. So I really like it for the editing freedom that you get from just two clean audio tracks.
That's it. And in case you're wondering, you're listening to the double endisode. So this episode is going to be super quick and it's just about doing a double ender. So something that Jackson and I have had issues with before. And it's one of those tips that I heard a long time ago, and Jackson, who knows much more about audio production than me, it's just one of those things that he'd never heard. There's a switch inside of Skype, and I'm going to use Skype as the example because it's the thing most people would use, I guess, to do just a one-to-one recorded conversation or one-to-many, up to a few people. There's a switch in both the Mac and PC versions called Adjust Microphone Settings Automatically. You really should turn that switch off and get your own mic gain level with the actual slider up to a decent amount for both your recording and so people can hear you on the other end of Skype. Because what that does is it's always searching for a microphone signal, and that's that wish-washy ocean sound that quite often builds up in the back of Skype calls. And if you've recorded them at home as a listener, you'll know that sometimes it sounds like there's this big rushing noise that builds up in your co-host microphones when you're talking. And that's that adjust microphone settings automatically thing. It's continuously looking for a signal and it makes this kind of swirly ocean noise. So that's my tip on top of Jackson's tip on top of my tip, is to turn off that setting and you'll get a much better result. And also, just in case you're wondering why that might be applicable, you're not going to get issues with that kind of stuff anyway when you're recording either into your own portable recorder or into something like Audacity as a double ender, because you're actually taking the whole of the Skype call kind of out of the equation. And unless you happen to have a computer that really is underpowered and can't run Audacity and also be running Skype, you should end up with a better product most of the time, I would say, or any other recording software that's not going to kill your computer. Probably wouldn't advise running Pro Tools and doing a Skype call simultaneously, but Jackson might have a little bit more to say about that. Have you ever done a double ender with something like Logic Pro that's probably more demanding than what Audacity might be to record in?
No, I don't think I have ever tried that, but I've got, I don't think it's a risk I can take on my computer because it struggles running Logic Pro on its own at the best of times. So yeah, anytime I've done that, I've always used Audacity. Although, to be fair, Audacity, especially if you've got a big file in Audacity, it's going to be fairly slow on my computer. But I think that might be, I think when it's recording, because of the way it's storing the information, it's not really taking up a lot of memory. When you're editing and playing back a 60-minute file or whatever you've got, then it's sort of drawing the whole file somehow, and that will slow my computer down. But just the recording seems to be perfectly fine, so I can run recording with probably any other piece of software running at the same time.
Awesome. So that's probably about all I've got to say about doing a double ender. I haven't done enough of them, or as many of them as I would like. And obviously, if the person you're recording with is intimidated just by Skype or just by a Google Hangout, then asking them to go the extra mile and record a double ender for you might just not be reasonable. And then you really need to be looking at a solid solution. So something like Ecamm Call Recorder for the Mac or a good call recorder for your computer. But even better would be to actually have, something like a Mix Minus running or something similar to what Jackson did for a few of our previous Skype calls in Social Audio Think Tank, where he was bringing in everyone's signal individually and mixing it onto either a hardware device or a really solid audio program like Logic Pro. So have you got anything else you wanted to say about double enders, Jackson? I mean, this is going to be our first complete full double ender where we're both sending each other big ass WAV files for Social Audio Think Tank. We've done a few other different variants and we've been most of the time in person. So I guess one thing, just for anyone who's interested, how is the H6 shaping up as an interface? Because I know in the future episode, which will actually be recorded in the past, so it's a bit of Terminator stuff going on there. We actually didn't use the H6 in that fashion, so it might be a good chance just to say something quickly about the H6 as an audio interface.
No, well, I mentioned in that future episode that I'd never used the H6 as an interface yet, so I hadn't tested it, and that's a total lie. I actually had done and forgot about, and I'm using it now, and it's a lot better than the H4n, if for no other reason than the USB cable connecting it to the computer is about 5 times longer, because the H4n one was really short and it had to be right next to the USB port basically, and just having that length there means it feels a lot more stable, and it's not like I moved the computer and it's going to fall out of the port. So I'm really happy with it.
Excellent. Cool. So that'll probably do for the double endisode. So you can go to socialaudioThinkTank.com and look for double endisode, which now I'm thinking about, it's probably not the greatest title for anything, but we won't talk about that any further. So hopefully everyone's got a chuckle out of our naming conventions. They're obviously a little bit more unusual than a normal podcast about podcasting. And if you have any feedback about what you'd like to hear as an episode, so if you've got a topic, we'd love to cover it, but make sure that you send it through in some kind of funny variant of the name. So if you want us to cover a microphone like the AT2005 from Audio Technica, maybe request the AT 2K episode or something silly like that, because then we'll definitely do it. And I don't have to come up with a silly name because I'm running out.
Yeah, I can see this getting out of hand at some point in the future.
Yeah, soon enough we'll have to do an episode and just and talk about whether it actually got us any extra listeners or whether people think we're just jerks for having that stupid naming convention. So Jackson, I think that'll probably do for me at Joshua C. Listen on Twitter.
And I'm at Oz Podcasts.
Cool. And just finally, other than going to socialaudioThinkTank.com, where you can find all the links to Stitcher and iTunes and all the subscriptions and all that sort of stuff, and today's show notes for the double episode, you'll also find there now a link to Patreon. And if you wanted to go straight to Patreon, patreon.com/OzPodcast, so OZ Podcast, and that is the network level that looks after Social Audio Think Tank, and obviously that's Jackson's creation there. So anything you can share around or even donate $1 or whatever helps this show and all the other shows on the network continue to grow and, not send us all broke. So,
Yep.
Cool, mate. Well, I'll see you later.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
Home and away, fighting for a piece of you. Just a little moment slipping away.
Listen to Australian podcasts. ozpodcasts.com.au